I had done a lot of quality engineering work, processes, methods, technologies, whatnot. Okay. When I retired in 2015, I thought I'm going to dive into security, but connected with quality in terms of life cycle and things like that. Although I also spent time in security tools and also vulnerabilities and whatnot. What you'll hear from me is my own research work, which I try to think through and try to see how it can be implemented, and hope you like it. It's not a talk about this is a vulnerability and how you find it. This is a talk about how would you bring in security in your development. Okay, and I have done a couple of these. Some of them were specific to software, to lifecycle, but this is very related to how do you bring a story in and go through it as you develop your application to make it secure. Okay. Agenda is very simple. I am going to give you the SDLC framework, agile SDLC framework, and then we'll look at what are the basics of software, basics of security. After I do that, we will look at who the stakeholders are, and then when should we do what and who should do it. You will get a feel for that. You'll get a good understanding of that, and I'll conclude the talk with that. Okay. So this is your basic agile life cycle. Okay? And you have a backlog, and you take story, X number of a story for each iteration, and you run it through the process. All I have added here is security stories. Okay? And they can come in two forms. One story could be just security specific, where somebody says, my credit card information should not be stolen. That's very specific, very, very specific to security. The other one could be that my password should not be hacked. Two different things, two different levels. So you have to make sure that you have security specific stories and any implied security sub-stories that could come from other stories. Okay. Are all stories equally vulnerable? No. Some are low risk, some are medium risk, some are high risk. Okay. I want to tell you, this is a PDF, so I can't animate anything, but this is well animated. So how do you know then which story is at what level of risk? You have to have a way to determine the vulnerability level of a story so that you can prioritize it with respect to development, with respect to testing. So you need to really understand how risky a story is. And you do that by a technique called STRIDE. And STRIDE stands for spoofing, where somebody is trying to spoof your identity in some ways. Something that has happened to me is shoulder surfing. Somebody's standing behind me. I'm typing my password, and they got my password. Tampering is when it's intentional modification of the data. You can even delete is in tampering. If you delete the data, that's a tampering too, data tampering. Repudiation, you need to have a way, if you were hacked, you need to have a way that you can prove that somebody you know or somebody, a hacker, had it, and this is who the hacker is. That's repudiation. So you can prove it too in the court of law. You can prove it that you were hacked by this person. Information disclosure, when the data is unexpectedly disclosed to somebody. It could be intentional by a hacker, or it could be unintentional. You can have somebody internal who didn't take care of something and the data got exposed. Somebody without passwords, or somebody knew the password and they go or somebody did not, your internal person did not take care of the security the way they should have. Somebody left the laptop in the car and laptop got stolen and go ahead. Denial of service, that's when your system is hacked to the point that it cannot function anymore. And then that's what causes total non-functionality of the system. That's denial of service. And the last one is elevation of privilege. People don't pay much attention to that because I have worked for one company, and it's not HP, where I was told, well, I have a coworker, a very respectable coworker here, ex-coworker. I was told, hey, I went there, I said, I want this person on my team to be added to this group, and they said, oh, we'll give you the privilege, you go add it. So I had the privilege to add anybody I wanted to add in. So that's the escalation of privilege. So that's how you will decide. You can decide. There are other ways to do it. How risky your story is. You can even enumerate it, and I'll show you how this works. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, the basics of security. There are three important things when we come to security. The first one is confidentiality. Do not reveal who I am to anybody. Keep my information confidential. The first rule. The second rule is integrity. Do not change my data, whether data is stored or in motion. The data should be intact, no matter what. And then we just talked about availability. Whatever the intended period of time is, where the system should be up, it should be up. Okay? Now somebody, and I've been given examples, hey, you want a very secure system? Yeah, I want a very secure system. Lock it up. Don't let anybody use it. It will be very, very secure. But it didn't serve any purpose. So those are the three pillars of security. We call it CIA. And everything you want to do around security is based on these things, these three things, three principles. And I just talked about it. No access, no change, should be open for an intended period of time. Okay, so it is an example of a login. Story is login, and here is how stride will apply to that particular story. If I start from the top, spoofing is you want, when you, this is a little bit down there. When you want to validate a client data, and you do normally do that by some kind of query. By some kind of query, the query should not be built on the fly. Don't get the data as parameters and build a query, because if you did that, there are very good chances of SQL injection, and you can lose, so you can let somebody in through that. So that was the first one. Says, so when I'm logging in, you make sure that it's a secure network and the transmission is secure. There's proper encryption in place. Okay? So that would be the security control for that. Repudiation in this particular case, in login, repudiation is probably not an issue. The next one is information disclosure. Now, this is a process now. It didn't used to be before. You hide my information as I'm typing it. It's just not the password. Everything I type should be hidden. Okay? And then denial of service kind of deep. You know, when the somebody is trying to log in, there is a handshake taking place. Okay? And if you have a bot system and you keep on just try to log in, the handshake becomes ineffective. And there's no handshake, you can't get anybody on the line, online. Okay? That's the example of denial of service, elevation of privilege. I give an example of that. In this particular case, validate my data, use prepared statement though, so that my privilege doesn't escalate any further. So those are the type of things you can do through stride. Now, if you have X number of stories, and you want to see which one is the high risk story, you go through this analysis for each story, and wherever you check, subject to spoofing, subject to tampering, you will get that feel that this story is very risky because it's subject to all 6 different factors. You can enumerate it, and later on, I may have an example here. Okay. So this is how you decide which story is risky, more risky than the other. So now here is a framework where we have agile development, and we have stories, and now we know which stories are of high risk and which are lower risk stories. So we can deal with that appropriately. If it's a high risk story, we want to do a lot of things about it. If it's a low risk story, we might even say, hey, if we don't have time to test it, we'll deal with it. It's just risk management. Okay? So the example I just gave you where I had stride and I had security controls there, how do you really implement those security controls? Well, first of all, you have the policies, and they come from the top. The top could be your chief security officer, the top could be your security manager, but that's where they come from. They formulate the policies. These are the security controls that we will be using at high risk level stories. Okay? Then you put the process in place. The process could be very simply, okay, to implement the security control, we'll make sure we have code reviews. Okay. And then the third one is some guidelines. There are always best practices for doing things. Okay. When there is fire, what do? We have a fire door which will not close. It will always be, it'll go both ways. So that is a policy that this is how, and that we will not close the fire door. Okay. Those are the policies that should be in place. They should be put together with guidelines. So this is how you implement security controls religiously. Let's go next one. Okay. Back to the stories. We have a story, and I don't know if you guys, okay, let me ask you this question. How many of you develop acceptance criteria for a story in agile development? Raise your hand. That's quite a few. So acceptance criteria is something which you will put together from user perspective. The user will only accept this story if these criteria are met. So first thing you do is you put an acceptance criteria. Next obvious step is we're going to design the story, develop it, and then we will code it, test it at 2 different stages. First stage is raw code, second stage is running code, and we test it from security perspective. That is the chain or the steps a story will go through when you are doing agile development. Okay. So here is a framework of who should do what. Okay. And this shouldn't be new because I know I used it 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. So it's called RACI. R stands for who is responsible for this particular work. So for example, if you're talking about testing a story, who would be responsible to do that work? A stands for accountable. So who's had his own line if thing didn't happen? Somebody who's accountable, who is maybe a higher level person, he'll be accountable if the job doesn't get done. Who will be consulted? These are the people who may be subject matter experts. They will give advice. There could be situations where marketing says, I need it by tomorrow. So what should we do? So that would be consulting from delivery perspective. Okay? And then some people will be informed. Okay? Whoever they are, could be managers. They would be informed about what the status is or how things are going. that's just a basic framework where we assign, I say, duties to different people. Okay. So if we talk about security and agile development, these are the actors. I see product owner as one actor. The other person would be development engineer. They're involved about security aspects of writing the code. Then we have security engineer, somebody who tells you or guides you how the security controls, what security controls should be used and how they should be used. And then we have QA engineer who would be involved in testing those security controls. When you test login, and I know login, every application you look at, we test login, but how many people test login from security perspective? Most people in the system, they log in, they probably put the right login and right password, and you're done. Login normally, if you look at from functional perspective, is not a testing which we focus on a lot, okay? From if it's not a security perspective. Okay, so let's go through a story, and this story is sign up. Now, sign up basically means that you are new to the system, you're new to the web portal, and you are trying to establish yourself with the web portal. So you're gonna sign up first. In that sign up, you will have, if you break that down, there's a few stories. There is some acceptance criteria that the story should meet. And the first one is, like I said here, only collect essential PII information. Don't ask me to put everything. If you don't need my social security, I shouldn't be giving it to you if it's not usable. The next one would be, whenever I'm sending sensitive data, that's an acceptance criteria for the person who's going to buy your system, use your system, would be asking for. Okay. Second one would be, hide my sensitive data, and hide it when I'm entering it, and also hide it when the data is in motion online, okay, and hide it when the data is stored on the database. Make sure that the data is secure, it's not exposed, cannot be exposed to anybody who is not authorized. Okay. I talked about motion, I talked about stored, and last one is tempering, changing the data. Make sure nobody can change my data. So from a user perspective or from a customer perspective, if my story is sign up, I would want to have at least this acceptance criteria. Okay. And there could be more. There could be more. Okay. If you want to go deeper, if you say when you protect my data in motion, it would be send my data on a TSL or SSL, something which is secure, and also make sure is encrypted. So those will be the security controls. Now I'm going to tell you something. If you were going to test, and I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, if you were going to test data in motion for security, and I just gave you two things they should be on a secure SSL line, TSL line, and it should be encrypted. And if you go through regular testing like we do, send it different ways and take a look at the data, it would be a lot harder than reviewing the code. When you review the code, you know what protocol you're making, and you know whether the data is the data is encrypted or not. It's easy to do that because somebody who's writing the code will use an algorithm to encrypt it, and the call will include the way the data is being sent online. Just an example how easy reviewing code review, how code review can make things easier on you. Okay, so this is the stage where you will develop acceptance criteria for a story. Okay. Go ahead. Now, who should do the work here? So what we have here is person who is responsible for acceptance criteria is the product owner. The person who owns the product represents the customer. Right? They should be putting the acceptance criteria together. Yeah. Accountable person will be Scrum Master. Right? Scrum Master is the one who gets your work going. So in this particular case, a Scrum Master would be your accountable person, and consulting person would be security engineer, because you want to make sure the right security controls are in place. So your security engineer will guide that, and whoever needs to know that would be informed. So somebody in development group might know, hey, so how are we doing with this story?
Yes.
They may be informed that, yeah, we now have the acceptance criteria already. Okay. So here is this example. I think I've just covered that. I covered the first part, covered the second part. Let me go to the next one. So let's go to design and development. You're going to design the code and develop the code. So there are some basic practices that one should keep in mind. Okay? And these are not the only ones. There is more to it. You can find more best practices that you can use for security purposes. So first one is, I'm going to highlight them briefly. Defense in depth. Two-factor authentication is defense in depth. You're logging into the system, you're typing the password, and then your financial institution sends you a text message. That is the defense. There's two levels of defense there, password and confirmation that you're logging on. So those are the things which would be necessary. Fail secure. If you think that there's an activity going on, hacking activity going on, you shut the system down. You don't let that happen any longer. Okay? So fail securely, that means person is in, hacker is in, but they can't do anything with it because we're failing. We are shutting the system down. Okay? Third one is protect weak code. Now, it will be a valid question. How do I protect weak code? Weak code is weak code, and it's the code will be executed. So what you want to do is make sure your logging system is very well put together. So you know who is coming in and where they came from, what story came there from, and who is trying to, at least the actor, the person who is trying to cause that failure. So you can at least have something where you have a strong log and you can go back and see where it came from. Principle of least privileges, I gave you that example. I want to mention here the fact that when you load a new system, when you build a new system, most applications or sub-applications are set to default. And the default is always medium privilege. Because when a manufacturer sets the privileges out, they will not, it's restricted to the lowest level, and they would not want to do it at the highest level. They would probably put it somewhere in between. So you want to make sure that they have customized those privileges to your requirement, to your application, the way they should be. So that's the principle of least privilege. And when I say that you would need to, this is the development team. They want to understand that and implement that. Use of prepared statement, I kind of alluded on to that. SQL injection happens by the fact that somebody puts information in the login name and the password, and that information, the code takes the information, puts it together, makes a query, and boom, you're broken. Because I don't know if somebody broken into the system like that. SQL injection, how many have practiced it? Oh, okay. I should have asked how many of you are in security. No big deal. Just believe me, there are ways you can just put apostrophe, one apostrophe, and you can break the system. I have done that. Okay. So what is happening here is in a SQL injection, you are putting a number which is always true, and you normally leave the password blank because the SQL query will ignore the second part. It will only work with the first part. The first part passes, second part will pass because it's an or. It's an or, this or that. Go try SQL injection. It's very easy. So things like that, if you prepare your statement by taking the values, don't join them together and make this the query, but take those values and then build the query. That's the prepared statement. And that always guarantees that nobody can put values which can cause the SQL query to pass. There's a lot more to it, but this is how you prepare the statement are put together. Who is responsible? Who should do what in this particular case? And the lead engineer should make sure that best practices are being followed. I could say managers should make sure, but managers are a level away. I think the lead engineer is the one closest to the engineers. They should make sure that they are responsible for it, and accountable person is development manager. He would have the consequences of that kind of a that kind of a risk to the system. And then your consulting person would be your product owner, security engineer. Security engineer mostly would be the person who should be consulted on that, how we are really protecting the code. And then again, who should be informed is need basis. Somebody who needs to know should be told about it. How much time do I have? Go to the next one here. Okay. Static testing. Remember the good old days? I don't know, it was maybe 25 years ago when you compiled C code and you got compilation errors. That's the static testing. That's whenever you compile your code, there are scanners out there which will give you the security warnings. There's different security warnings you'll get when you compile your code. That's one. The basic static testing is done on the raw code, and I gave an example before. Code review is the best way to do it. The problem with the code review is it's extensive work. Somebody needs to know the code. Somebody needs to know the security principles as well. Then you can do a good code review of your story. But static testing refers to when the code is raw or binary. It's not executable yet, but it's compiled. Like I said, there are tools out there, and all tools have problems. They're not all good. They may, and with security tools, most of the bigger problem is there are false negatives. Okay. Now, false negatives are bad. False positives are equally bad, because if you get a false positive, something is not right, you'll be spending your time just trying to fix things which is not even broken. Okay. So that's static testing. Let's go to the next slide here. Dynamic testing. Dynamic testing has been in existence for a while now. There are all kinds of tools. Z-proxy is people mostly use this on to find out the basic security problems. It gives you all different levels of vulnerabilities. Burp Suite is another one. Burp Suite is free. Z-proxy is really free. It's by OWASP. How many of you have heard of OWASP? That's encouraging. So that's my guide to go. Z-proxy is by OWASP, free, totally free. It has good support. It's being used by lots of people. Burp Suite is another one. some part of the burp suite is free, but if you want a really, really fancy burp suite, you have to pay for it. And it's not very much. Like it used to be $350, maybe more now. Right? So that's the dynamic testing. Now, this is just the scanning. And the scanning is when you take a tool and run the tool on your code, and it'll give you some high-level vulnerabilities. You haven't tested the code yet. You're just running through a scanner. Now, there may be times when you say, oh, yeah, we have run that, we have run it through Z-Proxy, we have run it through burp suite, it's good. No, it's not good. Because those tools are designed to find particular vulnerabilities. They're not designed to find all the vulnerabilities. Okay, so in the same dynamic testing, what would you do next? Next, you want to do regular QA testing. You have your security control. Somebody says, my data should be protected at the other end. So when you go test, it would be, let me go check the data on the other end. Is it the right data, encrypted, stored? Those are the things you need to do as a QA person. Okay? Now, what we have done so far is found out the high-level vulnerabilities, and we have also found out the structured testing which we do in regular QA, but we haven't tested like a hacker yet. Okay? At that point, you do penetration testing. Okay? Penetration testing is very specific task, and we were talking at the panel yesterday, and it requires some really, really different set of skills. It's like evolutionary testing where you don't know anything about the system and you're going through and trying to find out different things that are wrong. You don't even know that they're or not, but that's what penetration testing is. I would not pass a penetration tester test. I've tried it 3 times. I couldn't score more than 30% because it's a different skill set. You have to learn a lot. And once you have learned it, you will pass it every time. So that's penetration testing. Once you're done with penetration testing, at that point, you have gone through all the possible testing you can do on that story. Now, that doesn't mean everything passes and you are good to go. You may have some failures there. And then at that point, you want to consider what is the risk I'm taking and how do I defend the situation? How do I do risk management for the story? So we are all software quality people. There's no perfect piece of software anywhere. So, but you make sure that you know what the risk is and you can take that risk. For that, the test engineer would be a responsible person, and then test manager, whoever the test manager would be accountable, product owner, security engineer, development engineer, they would all guide. They will be consulting, and then it's need basis. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, QA doesn't do security, so what do we do? So let's go to the next slide. Remember? Okay, we can go to the next one and then come back to it if you want. Remember, we're talking about red, blue, and purple teams? Okay. So red team has always been hackers, people who hack. They could be security engineers. They could be people they just want to break the system. Okay? And
hello everyone, I'm Archana from Educator, and I
red
welcome
team.
you all to
Blue
yet
team
another.
would be a combination of security engineer and the development engineers. And the way that works is security engineer knows the security controls and development engineer knows what they put together and they make a good team. And then we say purple team, they all get together, including QA, and they try to test the system. Okay. So who should own these areas? It really needs to be organized in a way where everybody who knows about the system, who has built the system, is together in it. And that's how that should work. Can we move back to the previous slide? Okay, testing priorities. Now, how do I prioritize my security testing? Okay. first factor is how risky a story is. If you're dealing with stories which are, for example, login is fairly risky. It's a very high risk story. You want to make sure that you have taken care of that particular story. It's on your chart. It should be tested. There may be other stories like that. What is developer's confidence? Somebody might say, oh, I wrote this code, but I'm not really sure if it's totally secure or not. So look at those areas where you can say, this is not so secure. I want to make sure it's secure enough or secure. And there's always known breaches. There's databases out there. And if you think your application may fall into one of those breaches, you want to test those. Some known breaches. SQL injection was the top, has been top risk situation for a long time. That was the top, what do you call it? OWASP top 10. OWASP top 10 is a list of 10 vulnerabilities which are seen very widely. OWASP top 10, SQL injection was the top one. So you want to make sure that SQL injection is taken care of. Okay. So those are the things which you need to understand. Test engineer, and I would say test engineer along with security engineer, maybe even security engineer should be more involved when we talk about this ratio chart. And then consulting, product owner should be there to consult along with development engineer when we prioritize your testing. Okay. Go next. 7 more minutes. Okay, so we talked about this. I think this is the end of the talk, I believe. I can spend all the time you want me to sit on this slide. There is no technical aspects of it, but the first thing is what you're doing now here. You're getting yourself educated. How do I build a secure system? Education is very important. People to realize that I need to know about this. And it has become more important in the last 10 years than any time before, because we're seeing so many breaches. There was one yesterday from Russia where the airport portals were yesterday. So education is the first thing. And then awareness. It's just not security engineers or development engineers who should be aware of it. I think that everybody in the organization should be aware of security, and sometimes security just can be breached by somebody's carelessness. Okay. Organizational planning, you do want to make sure at some level, I don't know, how many of you have a security manager? Well, there's a few here, at least. Okay. So manager may be high-paid job. I'm a security engineer. I mean, you have a security engineer. See, so you need to move on. You need to treat this as an important aspect of your development. There's a lot of right now. There's a lot of titles with security, and not only that, there is so many certifications. I was looking at it. There's something like 30 some certifications you can get in security professional right now. It's a huge number. And everybody just comes up, hey, here is one more certification, one more certification. Find out what's best for you. Okay. If you are a QA type person, or you are a QA manager, something like that, and you want to go into security, first thing I would suggest, let them take a ethical hacker test or course, which is online. Don't have to pay very much, and they get to know how the hacking works. It's an effort, but it helps you build new skills. Okay? So that would be the starting. But I guess even before that, I would say look at what OWASP has put together. They have a huge body of knowledge which you can utilize and prepare yourself with. So that's the education part. Okay. Organizational planning. Who is caring in your organization to champion the security? Who is the person who would be championing it, looking at how we are doing, what should we do next? this is security is something that you don't realize until you have been breached. Once you have been breached, all systems go down. I know it happened at a company I worked at, not HP again. They had a breach. Everything they shut down everything. All the entire portal was shut down. As long as for as long as they could find a solution. There's another company I know of. They had a denial of service attack. Months went by. They couldn't figure out. Okay. And if you don't have a backup system, you're really hosed. Okay. So somebody has to have the planning in place. Okay, somebody should own security throughout the development, and that would be your security engineer or your security manager if you have one. Finally, collaboration between teams. We used to say, in old days, you say, okay, write the code straight over the wall to the testers. That has changed over time. It should be treated the same way. Okay, we'll get 5 minutes or so. Okay, questions? Questions? If there are no questions, I did a good job. If there are questions, I did an even better job. Okay. No, see, get into it. 5 years ago, I didn't know anything. I did not know much about security. At least now I can tell you something about security. So it's not hard. Your self-involvement, go to OWASP. Some of the trainings are free. Ethical hacking is totally free. Don't have to pay anything for that. You get a certificate. Okay. Yeah, just get involved, spread the word, the education. And thank you very much for listening to me.